If the company I worked for ever found out that I was writing this, I'd be canned immediately. So the who and what and where are fictional. We'll call myself Greg, and I deliver pizzas in a small rural town in northern Canada. The town I deliver in consists of about 25,000 people, spread out along the foothills of a large mountain range. Many people who live here are farmers and loggers and shit like that. We have a small college here too, so there's a few students from out of town living here as well. Unlike most delivery companies, the one that I work for allows people outside of the city limits to order pizza up to 50 kilometers away from our location. Our company's like that because many of the town's residents actually live outside of the city limits in the foothills where their farms are. If you're 50 kilometers away, it'll cost you an extra $20. I know that might seem outrageously high, but believe me, people really like their pizzas. Obviously though, this causes me and other drivers to be gone for long periods of time on deliveries. To top it off, we're open until 5 a.m. every night. This combination of variables has caused me to witness and be part of some really messed up shit during my several years working there. I don't know if other drivers in other parts of the world have the same issues, but here in northern Canada, there's a lot of really creepy and questionable stuff going on. Now, I don't consider myself superstitious in any way, but some of the things I see, I can't explain. Before anyone calls me out and says I'm a liar or that I'm just experiencing all of this shit by myself, I'm not. Other drivers have told me about the things that they've seen, because we regularly hit the bar after shifts, and some of those stories are scary as hell. Some of these drivers are really messed up over the shit that they've seen. I know one guy that keeps a lamp on inside of his car at night because he's so terrified of the dark after something happened to him that he won't tell anybody about. Several months ago, I want to say December, I was working a closing shift, and my delivery sector was mostly the outskirts of town along the foothills and further north. Being December, in Canada, there was about 6 inches of fresh snow, and only the highways were plowed properly. Driving the rest of the roads would be a death wish if you didn't have the right gear and experience. But luckily for me, I had an all-wheel drive vehicle, I had chains, and I had a lot of experience. Because of that, I was the one that was requested to take this pizza out to what sounded like a cheery old woman on the outskirts of town. Since the weather was so shitty, I knew that it was gonna suck, but I was hoping for a really big tip. So I called the number on my slip to confirm the address and check if she still wanted the pizza. She said she did, so I set out on my way. After I left the city limits, I noticed something alarming though. All of the lights, including the street lights, were out. I assumed a power outage due to the storm, and I gave my boss a call to confirm it. He confirmed that it was indeed a sector-wide power outage. I attempted to give the lady I'm delivering to another call and ask her if she still wanted me to deliver the pizza despite all the power outages. She said she wanted it and that she had a backup generator powering her house, so it would be okay. Plus, having the only house that was lit up in this darkness would be hard to miss. So I put my blinker on and continued back down the highway. One thing you need to understand though is just how dark it was out there. With it being later than midnight and not a single light on, the only thing illuminating the way were my subpar headlights. On top of that, it was snowing quite hard at this point. And for reference, my field of vision looked grim, as I could only see just a few feet in front of me at one time. If my car were to die or my headlights were to go out, I would be seriously screwed. About 10 kilometers down what I can only assume was a dirt road underneath the mountains of snow and in the middle of nowhere, I came across a car in the middle of the road with its hazards on. The car was diagonal across the road, and from its tracks I could tell it had tried to stop suddenly and lost control. Moving about 20 meters from the car, I couldn't see any signs of life, and noticed that the driver's side door was swung open, and snow was starting to pile inside the car. What alarmed me most, though, was what looked like blood on the inside of the window, and all over the steering wheel. Upon clearing the snow from the inside of the car, it was obvious that there was a pretty brutal accident here, and there was blood all over the driver's side. My mediocre first aid training kicked in, and my first response was to call 911 and to get an ambulance out there. I pulled out my cell phone. For the most cliche thing to happen. There was no signal. But then I thought to myself, obviously there's no signal. We're out in the middle of nowhere. At this point, I'd completely forgotten about the delivery, and I was pretty obsessed with the idea of finding whoever was out there in trouble in the boonies. The chance of another car coming by all the way out here, this late at night, was slim to none. This was on me. I managed to figure out a couple of things. Firstly, the person obviously hit something really, really big, like a moose or an impossibly large bear. The front of the car was almost entirely caved in, and both front wheels were going in opposite directions. No way this car was going anywhere. But then, drawing on past experiences, I actually couldn't think of any animal that would do that much damage to a car like that. Secondly, after seeing a small trail of blood leading up the road, I assumed whoever it was probably went walking for help. This is where I made my first mistake. I followed the trail of blood on foot. I wanted to play the hero. I bundled up and set out into the storm with a small LED flashlight. I was concerned with whoever had injured themselves in this accident and getting them to safety. After about 5 minutes of walking, I realized how badly I had messed up, as one single thought kept going through my mind. What if whatever the driver hit was still out here? Judging by how big the impact on the car was, I could only assume that it was a giant grizzly bear or something much larger than that I had no idea could be out there. Dealing with a wounded animal in the middle of winter was something my pay grade didn't cover. After a moment of clarity, I decided my best bet was to get back in my car and get back to cell service to call 911. But not even after I had taken 10 steps back towards my car, I heard what sounded like an entire tree being torn from the ground. The noise was absolutely deafening, and it scared the shit out of me. It threw me into a wild panic. I started sprinting back to my car, but kept getting slowed down by the fact that my legs wouldn't coordinate with each other. After sprinting about 5 steps, I ate shit. Hard. I tripped face first into a snowbank and just laid there. Just as I was about to get up again, I heard it. I heard what sounded like heavy breathing coming from just outside my range of vision. The noise seemed to be coming from the direction where the accident happened and where my car was. And at this point, something just felt terribly wrong. That labored breathing sounded more animal than human, and far too loud for any human to make. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing got louder, and suddenly I saw this thing that was making the noise. It had to be standing a minimum of 8 feet tall. Yeah, standing there on 2 legs. And then it started to run on 2 feet. But every couple of steps it would stumble and start running like a bear. On 4 legs it had this sort of loping gait, but then it would get back up on 2 legs and start running like a human again. It was almost entirely covered in thick white fur, and it would have been almost impossible to spot if this thing hadn't been covered in blood. Whether or not that blood was from it or the driver, I'd never stuck around to find out. Whatever that thing was, it was too distracted to see me, and sprinted right past me in the middle of the road, still breathing as heavy as ever. After what I thought was a solid 10 minutes, I forced myself out of the snowbank and sprinted back to my car. When I got back to the vehicle, all 4 of my doors were wide open, and the pizza boxes were strewn all over the road. Not even thinking about the pizza or the delivery, I drove straight to the police station to report what had happened. Officially, the police report states that the driver of the car collided with a large bear and that the bear dragged him off into the woods and devoured him. They never found his body, but they did find what appeared to be a portion of his spine almost 80 kilometers from where the accident happened. It was actually a really big thing in our town. People spent weeks searching for this guy, but they never found another trace of him. Whatever this thing was, it was no grizzly bear. I saw it with my own eyes. It was a monster. And that monster, it's still out there. My husband and I experienced something in the 90s that I can't even begin to explain. Back then, we were avid outdoor enthusiasts and would spend weeks or even longer camping in the deep woods. This time, we were in Maine and had a small RV. We drove it as far into the forest as we could and planned on being there for 2 weeks. We had just found out that we were having a baby and wanted to celebrate by doing something that we both loved and shared a passion for. This trip turned out to be the last time we went into the woods for almost a decade. For the first 8 days, it was an amazing time. We hiked, cooked over the fire, enjoyed the woods, and just relaxed as we daydreamed about our soon-to-be baby. And of course, argued about what to name him or her. A disclaimer from both of us. We're both military brats. We were raised by the toughest people I've ever met in my life, and neither of us scare easily. We're always out in the forest, and can track and identify. We're both experienced hunters too, although this time around we didn't plan on hunting. We did have our weapons with us though. Anywho, the 9th day we were there was just different somehow. The forest wasn't as busy with nature as it normally was. It was strangely quiet. During one of our hikes, we even found a deer carcass, or what was left of the front half anyways. It looked like something clawed the hell out of it. And from the bottom of the ribs down, it was just gone. It didn't look like a kill site though. There wasn't much blood. If that poor creature had been mauled there, I imagine there would have been a fair bit of blood around the area. But alas, there was hardly any. We figured it was either a bear that killed it, or maybe a poacher that disguised the kill, since we've ran into poachers in the past. However, it wasn't fresh, and the guilty party had since left the area, so we just moved on. That night, where we cuddled around the campfire, once again talking about our child, it was a little past 11 p.m. when we heard this feral scream. It was like nothing on God's green earth that I had ever heard, ever before in my entire life. It sounded like something straight out of hell. I can't even compare it to anything I've ever heard. It was just that unnatural. Like I said, we don't scare easy, but let me tell you, that noise, whatever the hell it was, sent a chill from the top of my neck all the way down my spine. I remember both of us darting up and looking around. We only had the light of the fire and a lantern at the time, since we left the flashlights inside, where our guns also happened to be. We exchanged these looks of confusion and concern with each other, and tried to peer into the dark, but out there, dark means absolute darkness. I told him I was going in to get the guns and the flashlights, and he asked if we should just stay inside. Part of me wanted to, but I shrugged off my fear and told him no. I wanted to stay outside by the fire. I grabbed the guns so we'd be armed, and the flashlights so we could see. We turned the flashlights on and shined them around, but didn't see anything at all. We looked and listened for a solid 10 minutes before settling back into the front of the fire and pushing those horrid screams out of our minds. We stayed out there another couple hours before the fire was going out, and we decided not to put another log on, and we decided to call it a night. I slept hard that night, even with the scream still playing in the back of my mind. The next day, though, was even more strange than the last. The forest was almost dead silent. I could see the animals around the forest. I could see the birds in the trees, but none of them seemed to make any sounds at all. It was like they were all terrified. I pointed it out to him, and he agreed that it was very strange. He'd never experienced the forest so quiet, unless there was a predatory animal in the area. Another chill. I did a quick glance around. I'm not sure if it was my pregnancy or hormones or my growing motherly instinct, but I really just wanted to go home at that point. But then again, I still wanted to be tough and decided to stick it out. We should have just went home. Once the sun went down that night, everything seemed to change, even my mood. Normally, when I'm in the forest, I'm happy as a clam, but that night, I just had this feeling of dread, like something bad was approaching us. And the air around the area seemed to have this static feeling, like the air was buzzing or something. It's kind of hard to explain. We cooked, we ate, we didn't even talk much until we sat around the fire again. He asked if I was okay. I just told him I felt off and uneasy. And then we heard that damn scream again. Only this time, it seemed to be a lot closer to us. This time, though, we had our guns and the lights with us. We stood up, ready to shoot, and shining the lights around again. But again, there wasn't anything to see. I told him I wanted to stay in the trailer that time, and we went inside. And that's when things seemed to immediately go from bad to worse, and shit really hit the fan. That thing outside screamed again, but it sounded like it was right outside. It was loud and unearthly. And then something slammed into the side of the trailer. Whatever it was had momentum. It hit it hard, and the whole trailer shook. I screamed in surprise, and he pulled me with him. We were standing as far away from the windows as possible. Then that monster climbed onto the roof of the trailer. We could hear it walking around. I thought about shooting through the roof, but decided against it. And we just stood there, not knowing what to do. This thing sounded like it was going back and forth between two legs and all fours, and was pacing back and forth on the roof. I guess it decided to jump down, because the trailer shook again, and we didn't hear the noise anymore. But then it sounded like something was knocking violently on the side of the trailer. This type of crap went on all night long. It'd be quiet for a little bit, but then it would run back up and either pound on the trailer or slap the trailer. It got up on the roof a couple more times too. This fear I felt was like nothing I've ever been exposed to. We just paced the trailer since it was detached from the truck. We weren't getting out of there. We tried our best to stay away from the windows and did a lot of crouching, neither one of us wanting to peer out and risk it coming through the window. We both had our guns ready though. If that thing came inside, we were lighting it up. But none of that even compared to when that thing said our names. Both of them. In this raspy, inhuman voice. It called my name first. When I heard it, I snapped my head up and looked at Steve. Both of our eyes were gigantic. It said my name a couple more times before it started calling to Steve. Obviously, we didn't answer back. I think we were both in a state of shock at that point. I just kept praying for protection. Steve sat silently with his gun in his hands, waiting to use it. Once we hadn't heard it for a while, Steve checked his watch and told me it was after 4 a.m. and asked if we should try getting to the truck. That's when my motherly instinct really came alive. I wasn't risking my baby by going outside. I was staying in here. It was obvious to me that that thing wasn't coming in the trailer at that point because it could have broken in by now. And I wasn't about to open the door and invite that thing to come inside. I did agree to look out the window though. I still regret that, even though it's been over 20 years. We peered out one window first and saw nothing. Then we looked out the other and saw nothing as well. We gradually made our way from one side of the trailer to the other, carefully just peeking out of the windows, one at a time. But it was the window up where our bed was that's haunted me all these years. We both climbed up there and pulled the little curtain back just a little bit. And there it was, just crouching on the ground, 20 feet away. I actually put my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. You asked me to describe this thing for you, so here it goes. Even though I hate thinking about that thing. It had long, skinny arms and legs. No, there wasn't a tail or antlers, but it was naked. No signs of anatomy for either sex. But this thing looked like it was 7 feet tall, maybe more. It was hard to say for sure though, since it was crouching down. It had these long hands and fingers, and there were claws that looked like talons coming from those fingers. It was white, like snow, and incredibly skinny. Too skinny to be alive, I thought, but still almost muscular, powerful. There was no hair on this thing, and if it had ears, they were too small to see. It looked like it had hollow eyes too, or at least jet black, so they looked hollow. You pointed out that I said it was really dark out there. Luckily, or unluckily, as I've always said, we had left our lanterns outside to discourage anything from coming to our camp. I know, a lot of good that did, right? We held each other's hands as we continued to stare at this thing. It was crouching like a person would if they were perching on the front portion of your feet, with your arms between your legs and hands or claws on the ground, and it was bobbing its head around. It looked like it was pained to breathe, actually, the way that chest was moving up and down. We watched it for like 20 minutes. The curtains pulled back just a sliver. It would rock back and forth, but it never got up on the camper again. It did keep screaming, though. It would raise its head up and let out that blood-curdling scream every so often. It was terrifying. We climbed back down on the main floor and just sat on the ground, in silence, away from the windows, guns at the ready. And while it didn't get back up on the roof anymore, we did hear it moving around outside and screaming, knocking some things over. After about an hour of sitting on the floor, my legs were cramping up pretty bad, and I really needed to get up. I decided to go look through the bunk window again, and there was nothing there that I could see. The light from the lantern was gone. That's probably when I was the most scared. I mean, that thing could have been standing right there staring back at me, and I'd have no idea, because there was no more light outside. I think that thing knew that we could see it because of the illumination of the lanterns and got rid of them. Soon after that, there was this huge bang on the side of the camper. Not like the first, but like something was thrown into the side of it. I was praying out loud at this point, asking God to give us the courage and strength to fight this thing off and defend ourselves and our unborn child. But that was the last thing to happen. For the rest of the night, all was quiet. We didn't hear it moving around anymore, and there were no more screams. Once dawn broke, we waited in the camper for a while, peering out of the windows and trying to see that thing, making sure that it wasn't anywhere out there that we could see. It wasn't, though. It was nowhere to be found. We went outside cautiously at first and looked around, guns still drawn. Once we felt marginally safer, we quickly worked together to get the camper reattached to the truck. We kept stopping and looking around, though, at every sound. What made me feel better, though, was the fact that the forest was noisy again, like it hadn't been the previous 2 days. I noticed this rock on the side of the camper, and a really big dent where we heard something hit the night before. I think it threw a rock at the camper. I pointed it out to Steve, and he pointed out that the lanterns were completely gone. I did a quick look around for them, but they were nowhere to be found. We got in the truck and got the hell out of there, eager to get out of the forest. We didn't say much at first, but quickly turned the conversation to how I was feeling. He was concerned for the baby. So was I. But I felt okay. More tired than anything, and relieved to be away from that nightmare. We got back to town, stopped to eat and fill up, talked about reporting it to game wardens or police there, and decided we would just make an anonymous report. Once we got home, we wrote down the experience and contacted the police department. They laughed at us, but said they'd write it down, and when someone was available, they'd go looking for any signs of foul play. I don't know if they even went looking. I don't know if they would even be able to find this thing. And if they did, who knows what it could do to them. I could tell it was smart. The way it moved its head, the way it stalked us, called our names, the fact that it took the lanterns away to hide itself in the darkness. This thing was intelligent. Why it didn't come into the trailer, I don't know. Maybe it knew that we were armed and it didn't want to get hurt. Maybe it knows what guns are and that bullets would kill it. I still don't know what to believe or even think about what that thing could have been. Some people I've told say it was a Wendigo. Others say it was a skinwalker. But neither of those things are supposed to exist, right? If they do, then what else is out there? Thank you for sharing this. Sincerely, Emily. This happened Christmas night of 2007 in upstate New York. The day itself was pleasant. Festivities galore. Opening presents early in the morning with my sisters, a wonderful breakfast made by my mom and dad, and delicious smells coming from the kitchen as they prepared a feast for our family. When that extended family got there for a visit, they brought pies and cakes for dessert, and then all of us just lounged around the living room for the rest of the day. It was about 8 o'clock at night, after everyone had left and all the food was put away for round 2 the following day, that I decided to head over to visit my friend in the next village. The drive was only about 10 minutes if I took the back roads to get there. First, a little background about where that friend lived. It was a housing development surrounded by a private lake, and you might call it a gated community. You could drive down through it freely though, even after hours, by entering one of 4 private entry points. Since the community has a built-around lake, the roads surrounding it are this spiral sort of shape. The houses were sparsely positioned on the outermost portion of the spiral road, closest to those private 4 points. But as you drove further in, there were more houses positioned closer and tighter together as you got closer to the lake. My friend lived on the outer edge of this development though. Once I reached the entry point, it would only take me another few minutes until I reached his house. His house is along with all the others that are far enough apart that you couldn't see them from the road as you drove by. There were either woods all around with long drives or open fields with long drives. You could see porch lights on in the distance, sure, but that was about it. As you entered into the development, the speed went from 30 to 20 miles per hour. There were no streetlights here for some reason, and I never put my high beams on. I couldn't go any faster than the speed limit anyway because there were speed bumps in place every 30 feet or so. I remember it being a mild night and having my driver's side window down, just taking in some fresh air. I was driving in silence, which was unusual for me because I normally have my music going. I guess I must have just wanted to enjoy the quietness after all the commotion that day at Christmas. I reached a section of road that had barren fields on either side and woods back after that. The houses there were privately nested into the trees right where they were at. As I drove though, I noticed what looked like something walking up ahead on the opposite side of the road and coming my direction. Mind you, I'm still going about 20 miles per hour the whole time, so it was probably less than a minute by the time this creature came into clear view. I got a quick scan of it from my windshield before my car was exactly parallel with it. This is what I saw. It was not a person. Not human at all. It stood on 2 legs though. 2 long legs, with long arms hanging down from its shoulders. It was very strong looking, lean, muscular, but not beefy in stature. It looked thin at the same time though and stood at least 7 feet tall. It was very light colored, but I'm not sure if it was white, tan, yellow, or even gray. It didn't appear to have any fur, but there was some texture to the skin. It definitely wasn't smooth. There appeared to be something coming down its back too. I don't know what it was, but all I can remember was its face and these small features that horrified me. The mouth and jaw were notably large. It had 2 pointed things on top of its head, kind of like horns. They went straight upwards with something little between them, but I couldn't make out what that was. That's what I got from a quick scan anyways. As my car became parallel with this thing, there was about a split second in between, when I went from looking out my windshield to looking through my driver's side window. And in that moment, its face quickly appeared down, looking at me, and all I remember was that mouth that was wide open. From its mouth came this horrible scream that I'll never ever forget. In fact, it still gives me chills just thinking about it all this time later. To this day, I can still remember what it sounded like. It consisted of a high-pitched, shrill shriek, enveloped by a deep, guttural growl, and both of these sounds happened simultaneously. I just kept driving all the while. This was all happening so fast that I didn't even have time to process it enough to be scared or in shock or anything like that. I just continued driving, continued past my friend's house. I drove all the way back home, and when I got there I called him to tell him what happened, and that I just needed to get back to the safety of my own house, away from that thing and away from the wooded area. I was probably running off of adrenaline or something like that all the way back home. And later on, I was in total shock after this encounter sunk in. If my driver's side window had been fully open, it could have touched me. Even worse, it could have ripped me from the car and taken me away. I'm absolutely certain of what I saw, but to this day, I still haven't worked out what it was. I believe, though, that what I saw that night could have been a Wendigo. I'm writing about an encounter I experienced 6 years ago in the Arkansas Ozarks. I wish to remain anonymous, as I do not want people to find out who I am. I've always believed in things like werewolves, Wendigos, Bigfoot, etc. to be a myth. I didn't believe that they could be real. But the things that have been happening over the years has caused me to begin to believe otherwise. Besides this experience, I've had a few other strange things happen. I've seen a possible Bigfoot cross the road, almost handed my baby to a figure outside my door who I thought was my boyfriend at the time, but who I realized had no face and was not my boyfriend. I've seen a ghost or something wearing a fedora in my room as a child. But that's not what I want to talk about here. This one is about something terrifying that I saw in the woods at my home one evening. Before I begin, I need to explain I live on a hill in the middle of the woods. My grandparents have a house just downhill from mine, and our yards connect with a trail that runs through a really dark part of the forest. My little brother, who was 16 at the time, was staying with them. It was late summer. This was 2012. I'd gotten home from a trip to the grocery store with my daughter, who was 6. I was sitting in my front seat, just gathering my purse and a few groceries to carry in. Suddenly, in the dim light from the moon, I could see a shape coming up the trail. It looked to me like the tall shape of my younger brother walking up the trail, but this wasn't a normal walk. There was something extremely odd about the uneven lope, as though he was walking with this huge, exaggerated step, very slowly, like maybe he was trying to scare me. As I watched it, it came closer and closer, stopping just beyond the reach of my headlights, next to our storage building that sat just at the end of the trail. I was sure it was my brother, though, so I called out to him to stop trying to freak us out. Silence. I stood staring. Whatever that was, stared back. I yelled out again that it wasn't funny, and that I wasn't scared. Still silence. As I became acutely aware of my surroundings, I realized my dog was going crazy in the house. I stood outside my door and told my daughter to run to the house behind me. She did. She was terrified. As she opened the door, Buddy, our dog, bounded out, snarling. Right here, I'm going to stop for a minute and explain that Buddy, although a huge Great Dane and Lab mix, is a very gentle giant. He never growls or barks. He's so behaved we keep him in the house, even when we're not home. And he adores my brother. Anyways, he came bounding out, snarling like an attack dog, and ran straight for me and my open car door. I was in shock. What the hell? I thought that Buddy was about to attack me. But why would he do that, I wondered. But instead, he threw his huge body hard against me, effectively shoving me into my car. I was thrown across my seat as he climbed halfway in, growling and barking, his front paws on me, pinning me down. But he was looking at the shape on the trail, not me. That's what he was growling at. That's what had him reacting so aggressively. He was really upset with the thing standing there, and obviously trying to protect me. I felt the hair stand up on my neck. Terror coursed through me as I realized that the shape could not be my brother. The way it walked, the fact it wouldn't answer, the fact that it was standing as tall as the roof of the storage building, meaning it'd have to be about 9 feet tall. I tried to push Buddy off me so I could run into the house, but he kept throwing his weight against me to keep me in the car. His short fur was standing on end, and he was shaking all over, still barking and snarling like I'd never seen him do before. Finally, I told Buddy if he'd let me get out of the car, I'd go into the house. And as if he understood, he backed off me and stood guard in front of my car, growling all the while I bolted for the house. Inside, I called my grandma asking if my brother was there, and he was. Had he been there the whole time? Yes, my grandma answered that for me. My boyfriend was also there, and they'd been in his room for several hours playing video games. I asked to talk to my boyfriend. When he came on the phone, I quickly explained what had happened. I could still hear Buddy barking outside. My boyfriend told me to stay put, that he and my brother were coming. I stayed in the house, listening, after what seemed like hours, but it was maybe only 30 minutes. I saw a light in my yard. I went out calling to my brother and boyfriend. They ran over to me, Buddy following happily behind. They'd ran up the trail, but found nothing except Buddy, who met my little brother halfway down. He was no longer upset, though, and just seemed like his happy old self. They'd walked around the trail area and the yard, trying to figure out what was going on, to try to find any clue as if who or what could have been there. But there was nothing. They decided it was my imagination, but I know it wasn't. Buddy has only gotten upset one other time since. It was when a figure appeared outside my door months later. For years, I thought about that weird gait of that tall, shadowy shape walking up my trail. I know that it walked on 2 legs. I know it couldn't have been under 9 feet tall. And I've realized the legs bent wrong, like the hind legs of a deer. Recently, I've come across a description of a wendigo, an encounter that somebody else had experienced, and they described the same strange loping gait with legs bending like a deer's behind. That same height, it standing silently staring. This caused a shiver to course through me as it sounded exactly like what I saw. I'm not saying it was for sure a wendigo, but it seems like the only answer. I know my dog was terrified of that thing. It was a terrifying moment in my life, and I hope I never see it again. I had not even heard of wendigos or anything in our Ozark woods until that happened. And then I saw this Bigfoot type thing bound across the road to my house. A lady heard me telling a coworker about that and told me we have small Sasquatches here, that she's seen them and had them take her livestock, but that everyone laughs at her when she insists on them being real. She was this elderly lady that lived here all her life. I don't know if it was a Sasquatch that I saw because it just seemed different. I don't know for sure though. Do you have any answers for me? I'm writing you to tell you this story on my uncle's behalf. He's an old man now, and doesn't know how to work a computer. Just like any small town, he was the man that kept to himself. He was called the creepy, scary hermit. You know the one. The guy that people said was an escaped convict, or a serial killer, or the guy that ate his own kids. But, to me, he's always just been Uncle George. The man that liked to keep to himself. People wouldn't walk by his house. They'd run. Every once in a while, there was vandalism. Some stupid kids that thought they were cool, showing how brave they were by going up against that scary escaped convict and writing something on his lawn or smashing out its windows. But Uncle George would just always tell us it was a small price to pay for the quiet and solidarity that he wanted. Growing up, my dad, my brother, and myself were always out in the forest. We'd camp, hike, hunt, whatever could get us out into the woods. It was the pastime that all of us shared an extreme passion for. We'd always ask Uncle George if he wanted to come with us, and he'd always shake his head. You ain't catching me in the woods after dark. Me and my brother were always creeped out by that when we were kids, but as we got older, it just kind of turned into a running joke. Every time we'd go out there, we'd ask, "Hey, Unc, we're going out into the woods, you coming?" "Hell no, you ain't catching me out in the forest at night." But after hearing his story, I don't blame him. Hell, it almost kept me out of the woods myself. Why he came on this one camping trip, I'll never be able to explain. I don't even think he could really explain it. But he came with us nonetheless that night. And then, when he got drunk enough to tell us exactly why he doesn't go into the forest anymore, it's something that I'll never forget as long as I live. Because as absurd and unbelievable as it sounds, I believe my uncle 110%. By then, my brother and I were almost adults. So, my dad was okay with letting him tell us this story. I think he knew it. Maybe he didn't believe him. Maybe he just didn't think that that same thing could happen to us. I think when we were kids, he wanted to protect us from that just so we wouldn't be scared and unwilling to go into the forest. But now, as teenagers, I think he was okay with us hearing it and letting us decide for ourselves whether or not we believed him. I remember Uncle George just sitting there at the fire, drinking his Budweiser. The man never drank anything else. It was to the point where he just got buzzed enough to tell us a story. This is the story that caused me not to sleep that entire night. In fact, I just sat there by the fire, staring into it, not saying a word for the rest of the night. And my brother, who was sitting right next to me, did the exact same thing. So this is his story. I'm typing it as he's telling it to me for the second time. I can tell you what happened in the woods now, since everyone else that was involved has passed away. My parents, who refused to believe me and forbade me from even talking about it. My friends' parents, who never looked at me the same again. Even the police officers, the ones that questioned me, and the ones that were out there looking for him. They're all gone now. Even that man that showed up in the black suit and came to talk to me after everything happened, the one that suggested that I never talk about what happened out there again, so long as I live. I imagine he's gone now too, so what do I have to be afraid of? It was 1944 when I had my encounter. World War II was going on. Times were tough. We didn't have a lot. Hell, we didn't have basically anything at all. So we had to go and find our own fun. For me and my friend John, that was going out into the woods and camping. We'd go out there as much as we could. All we had were 2 flashlights, a beat-up old tent that both of us could barely fit in together, our fire, and some soup if we were lucky. For me, it wasn't just about going out and camping. When I went out there, I'd try to find my family some food too. Rabbits, squirrels, frogs, whatever I could trap. I didn't have a gun. We couldn't afford one. So I couldn't exactly go out there and hunt. So I'd just go out there and trap whatever I could. The first day or two we were out there, we'd run around the forest and have fun. We'd play hide and seek with each other or tell ghost stories. We were 13 years old, and back then, I was practically an adult. Once our trip started to wind down though, that's when I'd go out and look for food for my family. The time we had our encounter was just like every other time we went out there. We must have gone out there a couple of dozen times. I knew that forest pretty well. When we first went out there, like I said, we were just playing tag, laughing, joking with each other, talking about wanting the war to end, and what it would be like if the war didn't end by the time we were old enough to enlist. We told stories to each other about how we would go over there and single-handedly beat the Germans, bring our boys home, and save the world from Nazis. Little did I know that that was the last time I'd ever see my best friend. The night it happened, we were just sitting around the campfire, telling spooky stories to each other. Next thing I knew, the forest went dead quiet. Everything out there just stopped talking to each other. The owls, the night birds, the frogs, even the crickets. They all just stopped. Like something big and scary was out there. And that's exactly what it was. Something out of my worst nightmares. We sat there in silence, just for a few moments, looking around nervously, barely even whispering to each other about what we thought was out there. We didn't know if it was a bear, or a wolf, or just someone sneaking up on us to take what little we had. Like I said, times were tough, and there were bullies out there that didn't have a problem taking what they wanted. Then, all of a sudden we heard something walking. It was out in the distance around our campsite, just out of the firelight. We stood up, back to back, ready to fight. I called out to whoever or whatever was out there. "Why don't you come on out? We're not afraid of you. We're almost adults, and we'll give you a licking. We'll give you a good thumping if you don't get out here." We shined our flashlights over there to see if we could see anything. Now, keep in mind that back then our flashlights weren't that good. Not like the ones you have now that can illuminate a football field. But they got the job done in that darkness. We looked around, but we didn't see anything. And then, from the complete opposite side of our campsite, we heard something else move. To this day, I think it was the same thing. That's just how fast it was. We shined our flashlights over there, and barely got a glimpse of something that was shock white. But what we were looking at was the leg of some kind of monster. We both tensed up, ready to run for our lives. We hiked in there about 3 or 4 miles, so running back all that way, in the dark, with all that forest, would be something of a miracle. Think how shocked I was when my own voice came back at us. "We're not afraid of you. It was my voice. My exact voice. But it didn't come from me. It came from somewhere out there in the darkness. How can something out there be using my voice? We were both in shock. Hell with this, John said. He started running. I called for him to wait. I didn't want to be left there all alone. John, wait for me. Don't leave me here. I ran after him, but from behind me, I heard my voice again. Don't leave me here. My blood ran cold. Whatever this thing was, wasn't made by God, that's for sure. It came from somewhere else. I started running faster. I heard this thing screaming and grunting behind me. Screaming like something straight from hell. Like something I could never even describe. I still can't imagine what type of monster that thing was that started chasing us. What type of creature could make that noise? I could barely see the silhouette of something following me. I caught up to John. He said we needed to split up. I told him he was crazy, but he pushed me left and he ran right. We were cutting through the trees. He said he'd meet me back at the road. I ran. I ran faster than I ever have. I was so scared, I was crying and out of breath. My lungs were on fire. They burned like they were going to fall right out of my chest, but I still kept running until I heard my friend scream. My best friend. My Johnny. He screamed for help. Help me, George. It's got me. Help me. I don't think it was that thing mimicking him. I think those were John's final words. After that, I heard that thing scream again. And then the forest was silent. I stood there, trying to hold back my tears, trying to stifle whatever sounds were coming out of my throat. Until, finally, I called out for him. I called his name, and I waited, but I didn't hear anything. Until I heard his voice on the other side of me. He couldn't have gone that far past me. Nothing human could have. George, come here. Help me. Come save me, George. I knew I was as well as dead, too. His screams came from one side of the forest, but this voice, whatever this monstrosity was that was mimicking my best friend, was in a different location. Maybe it was another one. Maybe it was just that fast. I don't know. I'll never know. And I don't care to know. I just know that it wasn't my friend. So I did the only thing I could do, and I continued to run. I made it to the road, and I ran to the nearest building I could find, which was someone's house. I got there, crying, pounding on the door. This man came out with a shotgun, ready to shoot the intruder, until he realized I was just a boy that was frightened out of his mind. He took me inside. I told him my friend was still out there and something attacked us. Once the police were contacted, they took me, and they questioned me on what happened. I was there for what felt like forever. I told them exactly everything that I had seen and heard, but nobody believed me that a monster was out there and had probably killed my best friend. Both of our parents were contacted. We didn't have a telephone, so an officer took the time to drive to our house to get my parents. When he got back, I thanked him for that hospitality, for caring enough to get a frightened boy the only people that he wanted to see. They all waited at the precinct. My parents would look at me, I could tell that they were disappointed and scared, but John's parents wouldn't look at me at all. The police officers there questioned me several times. They wouldn't believe my story, but I promised them, I swore to them, that it was true. I stuck to that story every single time they questioned me. I didn't waver. I told the truth. They finally figured out what I already knew. That I wasn't responsible for John's disappearance, but thought I was just some dumb kid that couldn't identify the animal that attacked us. They thought that when John was talking to me in the forest that he was still alive, but I know otherwise. There was just something too calm about that voice. I knew it wasn't my friend, especially after the terror that I heard in his voice, not minutes earlier. I didn't want to split up with him. Why did I let him talk me into that? We should have stuck together. Maybe we both could have made it out of the forest. After the police questioned me, I was still sitting at that precinct. I didn't want to go home. I wanted every update I could on if they found John. Although I knew that if they did find him, it would just be a body. After about an hour of just me sitting there, I was approached by this man in a suit. He had sunglasses on, even though it was nighttime. He asked me to tell the story too. I thought he must be some detective, so again I told him what I saw. He took his glasses off and stared me straight in the eyes as he said, "Son, I suggest, and it's something you should probably listen to. I suggest you heed my warning. If I were you, I would never talk about this story again. I think you'll take my advice if you know it's good for you." He stared straight into my eyes. I couldn't look away from his. He made me very uneasy. I could tell he wasn't lying, that I needed to keep my mouth shut. "Do you understand me, son?" he asked me. But I couldn't talk. I just nodded. He smiled and nodded too. "You're a smart kid." Then he walked away, and I never saw him again. 3 days later, after searching the woods over and over, they found John. What was left of him anyways. I heard my parents talking, and they said it looked like he'd been eaten by some kind of wild animal. Although none of the rangers out there could identify what it was. After that, I was made fun of at school. I had to learn to fight by myself pretty quickly. Before that, I always had John to watch my back. Wish I could have done the same out there in the forest. I never fought to beat people up. I only fought when the boys would bully me or say I was responsible for John's death, or if they talked bad about him. I couldn't defend him out there, but at least I could defend his honor. As I passed them, they'd pretend to be afraid. They'd say things like, "Don't kill me," or "Don't leave me all alone." That would really make me mad. But still, most of the time I never fought unless I was defending myself. I made it to the next 3 years till I left home. Ever since then, that's why I never go into the forest. Like my nephew said, I don't know why I went camping that one time with them. Maybe I just needed to finally get it off my chest. Face my demons. See if I could find that thing out there and come face to face with it. And ask why it chose us. I don't know if it's intelligent enough to have a conversation, but I get the feeling that it's at least smart enough to mimic your voices. so maybe it could communicate with you somehow. I want to know if it had been following us, or if we were just at the wrong place at the very wrong time. I'll never know. I'm too old to go out there anymore. I just know that there are things out there in the woods that are dangerous, that are deadly. I'm not talking about any bear or wolf or mountain lion or someone that wants to mug you and steal all of your shit. There's things out there that we don't understand and can't possibly begin to explain. They're out there. They took my friend. I'll never see him again. I miss him every day. I still wish him a happy birthday. We'd both be in our 90s by now. So that's my story. I want to thank my nephew for telling it for me, for putting it on this computer. I want to thank you for sharing it with the world. I hope you guys all take my warning. There are things out there in the dark, and people out there that know that those things are out there too. But these are people that if they have to, they'll force us to keep you from talking. And they'll use whatever means are necessary. I live in the middle of dozens of fields, laced with small wooded areas. In this region, something terrifying lurks around. All of this area was once incredibly dense forest and swamplands. My road has no street lamps, besides 2 porch lights that are barely ever lit. This is something that I've been seeing and have been afraid of my whole life. I see a tall figure, bigger than the corn stalks at full growth. It has a wide mouth and a long snout, and its eyes are the darkest black that I have ever seen. I've seen it outside the house on nights when I left my curtains open, peering inside. It had these weird, sharp, spiny things jutting out from its skin, and its skin always looks like it's bleeding or wounded. Sometimes it's closer to the house, sometimes it's further away, other times it's not there at all. Those are the times that I cherish, when it's not around. This creature, this thing, is so terrifying that we've never kept our dogs out long at night, or us for that matter. The only time we leave the house at night is if we're with somebody, or it's not a long distance. But even a short distance out there at night is still too far for me. And I feel like every time I turn my back to the night, it's running right at me. I find myself sprinting for my car on late nights. At one point, I was with a friend of mine that lives in the same area, and he and I were talking about life and just driving down the country roads where he lived as we did. It's about 2 miles deep into the forested area, and we got to talking about old stories. He mentioned to me that he never felt safe leaving his house at night, even stepping 5 feet from his own door. I told him the same thing, and that's when he described the tall figure. The same thing that I've seen my entire life. He said it had bony things sticking out of its back, and almost no meat on its bones at all. When I asked him whether or not he'd seen the eyes, he was silent. Unfortunately, he and I don't hang much anymore, but I guess it sucks less knowing that I'm not the only one that sees this thing. My grandmother swears to have seen things on these roads and in these fields, but she's never told me about it. I know this because she and all the other adults in my family used to gather in the living room and talk about happy things while I was there, but As it got darker outside, so did the stories, and I would have to go to my room. I used to sit outside the living room and eavesdrop when I was younger. It was terrifying to hear the stories that they would share. But my parents had seen that figure in the fields in mid-October. They said it moved like a big, diseased dog, and to quote my dad, who described it as looking like a piece of dead skin with broken branches as antlers. I still haven't seen the antlers on it, but I think what we've been seeing is a wendigo. Or maybe even more than one. Maybe that's why they've seen the antlers and I haven't. Because we're seeing different individuals. I hate going out at night. I feel safe during the light of day. But as the sun sets, my fear rises. I know this thing is out there. I just don't know how close it is at times because I refuse to open up the windows at night. It would scare me to death if I looked out the window and saw that thing staring back at me. I don't know what it wants. I don't know where it comes from. And I don't know why it's here. All I know is I'm not the only one that's seen this thing stalking our land, walking through the woods, maybe hunting and killing. Who knows? I like to stay indoors at night because of this thing. I'm afraid of the dark, but mostly, I'm afraid of what's hiding out there in the dark. Thank you for sharing this. I look forward to hearing the comments about what they think this thing is. Like I said, I'm convinced that I'm seeing more than one Wendigo out there. Thank you for your time. Good night.